Good evening, folks. Thank you so much for joining us for a Town Square webinar. Today is Thursday, January 19th, and we are very happy to have you all with us. My name is Matthew Zaradich, and I am the Assistant Director for Distance Learning and Continuing Education at Erickson Institute, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you. Before we get into the webinar itself, I just want to go over some technology how-to for folks who might not be used to using WebEx. So to get started with the webinar, I just want to mention a few things. You will see a Q&A panel in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Please type any question you might have here during the presentation. We will be watching the questions and may jump in to answer questions along the way. Though we may not answer your questions right away, please do know that we are watching the back channel and we will try to respond to as many questions as possible given our time. Also, you are automatically connected to the audio broadcast when you joined this webinar, but in case you get disconnected, you can reconnect by going to the Communicate tab in the top bar and going to Audio Broadcast. If for some reason you can't connect with your computer, you can request to use the telephone by clicking the phone button at the bottom of the participants panel. However, we do encourage you to use your computer if possible. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded, and a link to the archived webinar on our website will be made available after the webinar through a follow-up email. Now, I'm going to pass it over to Angela Fowler, who is the Director of Town Square at Erickson Institute. Angela, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar this evening. As we introduce our presenters tonight, they'll kind of click on and do a couple minutes on the video just so you can get an idea of who's talking. But for the most part, we'll be walking through slides this evening with a lot of images. So, bye. So in this webinar, we will really be introducing some ideas of technology. This is an introductory webinar, so really introductions about kind of connecting with technology in the family child care home. We're going to hear from some experts and family child care provider who uses some technology in the home. We're going to look at some specific approaches and specific appropriate ways to use technology and address some policies around the use of technology. I will ask some questions along the way, and really all you need to do is just answer and give us some feedback in the chat box. And again, as Matt said, you're welcome to ask any questions along the way. We'll keep track of those questions. If it's really something we want to answer at the time, we'll stop and kind of answer it there, or else we'll kind of collect questions. And then we'll also have time at the end for today to ask some questions as well. So I am the Director of Town Square, and I have some connection with technology. So I've worked in technology for a while and working with young children. So the concepts that I'm going to introduce tonight will really kind of be extended through our panelists tonight. So I want to start with the idea that we really need to think about the fact that we really can't bury our heads in the sand. A lot of us think, oh, technology, I don't want to go down that road. But in fact, technology is all around us. It's part of what we do every day, and some young children know how to use it even better than we do. So we really can't bury our heads in the sand. We're past the days of just ignoring technology. We have to look at technology in the way it's appropriate to be used. Particularly, most of you who are in family child care have probably heard the term STEM, and the fact that you're supposed to be doing a lot of STEM activities with young children to help them really prepare to be successful. The T in STEM is technology, so we need to be looking at technology and how we use technology to really address the idea of STEM and working with young children. So the ideas of how do we get started doing that? So we're going to see lots of ideas, introductory ideas today, and some introductory thoughts about that, and how do you stay on the right path, and how do you use resources and policies to guide your practice. Really important to think about what the policies are out there about using technology and how you can guide your practice by using these kinds of resources and technology. So let's start by looking at STEM itself. So what does STEM mean? Well, STEM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math. So here's my first question for you this evening, those of you who are out there working with children. what's an example of some engineering that you might do with really young children in your program? So in this case, I'm going to ask you to start typing in the chat box some ideas about what are early engineering activities that you do.
Okay, so folks, this is a great chance for you to be interactive with us during the webinar. So use that Q&A box, not the chat panel, use the Q&A box, and we will pass that on to Angela and our other panelists. So Angela, looks like people are already starting to respond, and everyone's saying the same thing, block building.
You are absolutely correct. A lot of times we just don't think that we're doing engineering activities, but we are doing early engineering activities with young children. So what we need to be thinking about is what are those same kinds of early learning activities that we're doing with technology in our family child care homes. So what are those? Does anybody have an idea of early technology kinds of things you might be doing in your homes with young children?
Once again, folks, do use that Q&A box.
iPad, digital cameras.
Excellent. Thank you, Sylvia and Linda.
Scholastic reading books, so e-reading. We're going to talk about that tonight. Learning apps. iPhone for documenting with parents. Lots of ideas for how we're using technology and computers. But we're going to even go into some other areas of technology tonight and really ask you to think really broadly around how we use it. So what is developmentally appropriate technology, DAP? Well, one thing we need to think of is really that we need to think of technology as both high and low kind of tech. There's lots of lower tech things that we can do, and it's really pretty much anything that we're using that's like a technology tool. So digital technology is one way that we can really do a lot of work with young children. You can work with them on projection and with cameras and video, and even light and shadow really is technology. You're using a tool that's a technology tool to play with technology. So keeping in mind that technology, developmentally appropriate technology, really means starting with something very simple and basic. It's kind of if you think about the idea of literacy development. You don't start literacy development with young children by introducing them to chapter books. You start with really simple ideas of emergent literacy. And technology is no different. Just like we start with building blocks with engineering, you start with really simple ideas about technology and introduce those into your program in a very developmentally appropriate way. So what devices should you use? Well, devices, kind of the same idea as we were just talking about with developmentally appropriate practice. Really, any device is an appropriate device to use if you're using it correctly. From flashlights to robots, really. It depends, again, on the developmentally appropriate practice and what children are really ready for and what they're able to really work with in an intentional way. So those are the things you really have to think about. So maybe you have an iPad and you have apps on your iPad, but maybe the children in your care really are not ready to do that kind of work. So you need to think about where are they developmentally and what are they ready to do and what kinds of devices. Maybe it's just an introduction to using an iPhone to really take pictures, or using old projectors in ways, or different games that you might have that you use on it. And even toddlers can really engage in technology in some ways. And actually, I think Tan might be going to share a little bit of what she does. And Tan, will you turn on the camera so we can see you? Tan is a provider.
Hi.
You see?
Can you see me? Can you see and hear me okay?
There we go. Thank you.
Hi, Tan.
Hi. So,
Want to tell us a little bit who you are, Tan?
sure. So my name is Tan. I have a degree in early childhood education. I taught for 13 years, and but I'm staying home now with my two children. My daughter is almost 4, and my son is 2. and I am a licensed exempt family child care provider. So I have varying ages of children that are in my home. I recently had another 2-year-old for almost a year, but currently I have an infant. So that's a little bit about my background. And regarding toddlers and technology, in our house, mainly the technology, and when I think of technology, I think of the iPad. It was mainly used to potty train my daughter. So being the first child, it was really easy to limit her use of the iPad and any of that. But I have to say that with my son, the 2-year-old, he has had more time. It seems like he gets as much time as she does because, I mean, he's always standing next to her when she's using it. And I can't limit it like I did with the first one. But I don't use it very often, but I use it for when we need to, like depending on what the situation is, where in this case it's learning how to use the bathroom for my daughter, or we'll talk about this more later, but we use it for FaceTime a lot.
Great. Thanks, Jen.
Mm-hmm.
So Tom's going to come in and out a little bit throughout the session with us today to kind of give examples of how she uses it. She's got a few really good examples there that she's going to talk about later. The FaceTime one specifically is one we've used in a module as well. So I'm going to walk us through, and I'm going to walk us pretty specifically through these particular guidelines because they're really important guidelines for you to know and understand. And these are also, there's a link also to these guidelines on the Townsquare website. And these are just the key points of these guidelines, but you should really go in and read these guidelines in full because they took a lot of time and development between NAEYC and the Fred Rogers Center to really think very thoughtfully about how we use technology with young children. And these really are guiding practices. So as we go through these, I'm going to walk through all of these specific points, and you'll kind of see these ideas brought up as we talk later in the webinar. So the first one, when used intentionally and appropriately, technology and interactive media are effective tools to support learning and development. I think the key words here are intentionally and appropriately. We already talked about these two, and that's the #1 key element of the guidance for using technology. So 2, intentional use requires early childhood teachers and administrators to have information and resources regarding the nature of these tools and the implementation of their use with children. Again, this really is saying that you need to educate yourself. You're all on this webinar tonight, so that's great. You're already starting to educate yourself, but we would suggest that you use a lot of resources out there right now that are there to educate you about how to use technology with young children. And this is just an introduction that we're doing tonight, so we're not going to get into a huge amount of detail about that. But there are lots of resources, and at the end of the webinar today, we'll go through a few of those resources that are really great resources for you to educate yourself. So continuing with this guidance, limitations on the use of technology and media are important. You have to decide what those limitations are, but there's also guidance within all of the resources that are out there to help you really decide what those limits are, and we're going to go into some more of those later. Next, special considerations must be given to the use of technology with infants and toddlers. I think that's a pretty straightforward. We know that we need to be careful with the use of technology with all children, but particularly with infants and toddlers. One of the things that always pops into my head when I think about this one, which was horrifying to me when I first saw it, was the bouncy seat that had a contraption over the top of it for an iPad to be stuck into it. That is really inappropriate practice for infants and toddlers. It's bad for infants in so many different ways, but just off the top, it's very bad for the development of the sight to have, screen time in front of them all the time. Really important to think about those things. So attention to digital citizenship and equitable access is essential. This one's a little tricky, so I'm going to ask you the question. What do you think it means by attention to digital citizenship and equitable access? Do you have some thoughts about that?
So once again, just in case anyone's just joined us, the way that we do interaction here on webinars is through that Q&A panel. So down in that Q&A panel in the lower right-hand corner, please be sure to participate by typing in answers. So once again, Angela, you were asking?
Yeah, I'm asking what you think the idea of paying attention to digital citizenship and equitable access really means. And this one might be really confusing. We might not know this. That's why I'm asking. It's kind of to get you to really think about it. What were you saying about being responsible, making sure they share equipment, turns?
Allowing the children to have their own personalization of use on a technology device.
Yeah, I think all of these are part of that. I mean, we need to learn how to be responsible participants with technology, and we need to learn that from really a young age. Digital citizenship. Think about some of the stresses we have right now in technology with online bullying. Those are really concepts we need to help children understand early on how important those things are. And equitable access really gets to the idea that we should be trying to make sure that all children at all levels, socioeconomically, also have access to the same kinds of equipment. So we need to find ways to help them really engage in those. Yeah, and here's somebody who's talking about families having access to tech. Yes, that's absolutely true. That's part of that equitable access. So how can we help them really engage in it? And then also here it's talking about the idea that ongoing research and professional development is really needed. This is really still an early field in terms of research. Dr. Pasiga, who's on tonight, is going to talk a little bit about some of the research she's done, I think. But it's really in very beginning stages. And so you need to kind of keep yourself informed and actually check into the research and what's happening with research and continue to work on professional development. This is an area that's not going away. In fact, it's probably going to become even more a prominent part of our life as we go through the next few years. So it's really on us to make sure that we understand it. The next resource or policy that I want to talk to you about is the American Academy of Pediatrics. And they have some recommendations about use of technology with young children too. For children younger than 18 months, you should avoid screen time and anything other than video chatting. And again, Tom's going to talk about this tonight and some of the stuff that she's done with that, and it's really great, the work that she's done. But we need to really be thinking about the intentionality of what that means, what it means to have screen time. So parents of children 18 to 24 months of age who want to introduce digital media should choose high-quality programming, and this is the really key part, and watch it with their children. So this means you too. This means we shouldn't be sitting children in front of digital media and just walking away. We need to help them become really good users of technology, and that means we have to interact with them. For children ages 2 to 5, limit screen use to 1 hour per day of high quality, here's the key point here, high quality programs. Parents should co-view media with children to help them understand what they're seeing and apply it to the world around them. For children ages 6 and older, place consistent limits on the time spent using media and the types of media, and make sure media does not take the place of adequate sleep, physical activity, and other behaviors. I think that's a pretty obvious one, but though we know that's obvious, it really doesn't happen. So it's good to stay on top of all of that. Designate a media-free time together, such as dinner or driving, and as well a media-free location at your home and in your programs. And you may choose to not have digital media or technology at all in your programs. That's fine. If you do, you should also have an area where there isn't digital media or technology. Having ongoing communications about online citizenship and safety. So here we get back to that online citizenship again, and safety, and including treating others with respect online. So there's some overlap here as well, but these are really two of the most prominent policies and resources out there for use of technology, so you should really be familiar with these. And again, you can find the link to these on Town Square. So getting started. So to get started using technology, you're going to look back at the developmentally appropriate practice, NAEYC, the AAP, but also think what can enhance my program. If I'm going to do something with technology, then it should be intentional and it should be an enhanced project. So I'm going to give you just this very, very brief overview of a research project that I did with Nature Explore and technology, and we looked at how can technology actually enhance working with nature, which you would think at first nature and technology don't go together at all, but in this case, we really looked at it as an action research project. If you're not familiar with action research, it's really looking at practice and drawing conclusions and researching something that you're doing within practice. So this is the way that we looked at it in this Nature Explore program, intentional practice with nature explorations and technology. So if you see this picture down on the bottom here, there's a teacher, and she's got an iPad, and she's looking at some things with children. And what they did is they went on a walk, and they discovered some things on the walk, and then the teacher was able to actually pull the pictures up that she'd taken from that walk, but then also they researched what it was they found on the walk online to find that for the children because they were interested in that. Then they also really did a great job of allowing children to even just use their own ways of using technology. And in this case, this child in the top right here is actually recording sounds outside in their nature playground. And then down here on the bottom to the right, these are children who are using a snake camera, and it's a camera that's on a really long kind of bendy stick, and so you can see in things and it connects to an iPad. So they were actually looking in some nests and getting a bird's eye view. So these were all things that really couldn't be done without the technology piece, and they used that to enhance the work that they were doing. So taking next steps, Mary's going to actually join us now, and she's going to talk about some taking next steps and some really practical ideas about using technology with young children.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mary Quest. I'm the content coordinator for Town Square. I also do a bunch of other stuff around Erickson Institute, but I was a classroom teacher, and I have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, and so this example comes from my home with my children. So you can see on the slide here these little brush bots. And where this began is my 2 boys were really interested in robots and really interested in those little Hexbug robots, and started asking about building a robot. And I'm sure in their mind they had a much larger thing on their mind at first. But we started kind of investigating this with just a Google search and found some YouTube videos of other children who were about their same ages who had made these little toothbrush robots. So we kind of got a list together, and this project kind of went on for a couple of weeks where we were collecting what we needed and then figuring out, okay, how do we connect these pieces together? And all that's really included is a toothbrush, which we cut the handle off of. You can use an old cell phone and take the little vibrator mechanism out of it. You can also purchase the little vibrator mechanism. There's a lot of resources online for finding those. And then one of those little batteries like that you find in your watch. So we kind of looked at these 3 components and how we're going to put them together, and had to do quite a bit of trial and error. And there was actually a whole ton of adult learning alongside of children that was going on through this process, where we were sort of collaboratively trying to figure out, okay, is hot glue a better thing to use, or do we just use the masking tape? So we tried a lot of different prototypes, I guess, of these different brush bots. And we kind of got something that was working, and then we realized that they were going to fall off the table, or they were going to scoot away from us on the floor. And so the boys had this idea of building some sort of arena so they could be battle bots. And we put the pipe cleaners and the tape out for them, and they kind of built their own little arenas they could run the brush bots around. And this has sort of turned into some additional interest where now my older son, my 6-year-old, is drawing more elaborate pictures and making really blueprints or plans for something that's a similar design with these 3 components, but maybe with a larger brush or a larger motor. And so it's sort of an ongoing thing. But Angela, you had mentioned early on about engineering, and I think this is a nice example of a crossover between engineering and technology. And obviously, you know, adults need to be involved in the step-by-step process here, but it was really exciting, not just for them, but for us too. We were excited to be building robots together. So that's maybe a little more of an involved project as an example, and certainly there's other things we're going to touch on coming up here that are a little more familiar kinds of things, but I thought that was an interesting example to share with you all. So I think Dr. Pasiga is going to join us now and talk to us a little bit about ebooks.
Yep. Hi, everybody. I'm confusing myself. I'm on the wrong video, but hi, everybody. I am Katie Pasiga. I am a research fellow at the Tech Center at Erickson, and I hold a faculty position in early childhood ed at Columbia College in Chicago. And I really have been studying ebook and other ways that digital technologies have sort of overlaid onto child development, mostly focused on the ways that it impacts language and literacy development. And so Angela invited me tonight to start to talk a little bit about ebooks and storytelling. I'm going to turn my camera off and sort of get on with it. So as far as ebooks and storytelling goes, I often get the first question, well, what device do you recommend I use with my children? And I often say, well, it depends. I'm sure you all are aware that there's everything from Navi tabs to Leapfrog makes a line of products. VTech has the more primitive toy kind of based reading devices. There's tag readers, there's the iPad, and there's so many things that can put a digital book in a child's hand. And so I always recommend that you think about what works for you. For a lot of parents, they already have a smartphone, and so I often suggest, well, find something that you can use on your phone to share with your child. And I can tell you that the Kindle app will run on just about any device, and Nook has a platform, and Amazon actually just developed an app that can run for 4 to 7-year-olds too. So anyhow, there's several devices that you can use. My 2-year-old, I forgot to mention I have an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 2-year-old. My 2-year-old, to be honest with you, she is using more of those toy inserts with the books that plug in, that it's really just a still book with audio, and that page turn signal like you would have at like a listening station. And that seems to work really well for her right now. But it's starting to develop some awareness of print, and that this set of words and this images go with this page in this book, in this language that I'm hearing right now. And so I think that that's a valuable experience. I lost my track. So there's a whole range of devices, and we need to think too about whether or not these devices have internet or not. Because what ends up happening inevitably, especially with toddlers and younger preschoolers is that they wander outside of the apps that you intend them to be using. And so think about that if you know you're not going to be sitting beside them and following that recommendation as well as you know you want to be. Think about whether or not that you want to have the internet enabled on them. The other thing I like to think about is the quality of apps. There are a whole slew of free apps, and there are many, many paid apps that are available. But one of the things that are recommended by both of those policies is that we consider the quality of the apps that we're giving to children. And quality depends on a number of things, one of which is the extent to which the hotspots, so the things that they click on that make all the sounds and noises, the extent to which those actually relate to the narrative or to the content of the book. For example, in an interactive version of Stellaluna, there's a picture of a ladybug on a tree in the background, and the ladybug has nothing to do with the plot line, but when you click the ladybug, it goes up the tree and makes a silly little noise. So that's an example of a hotspot that's not related to the storyline. Children learn much more in terms of literary knowledge when those hotspots are connected to the plot. There's a difference between a digitized book, just a printed book that's put on a digital screen, and more things that are interactive, that have games and music and animations in them. The other thing I think that is important when we're thinking about ebooks is that they're learning about the technology and how it operates. They're learning iconography. So that in one ebook, that page turn arrow looks like one thing, and in another ebook, it looks like another thing. There are multiple ways to turn and swipe pages. They're looking to navigate across and follow through hyperlinks in a developmentally appropriate way. So I guess in general, what to look for depends on the child, the context, and your goals of reading. The other thing that I think that you can look for is a consistency in what's called task orientation. So if you're giving them a whole slew of ebooks to interact with, is the swipe, the expectation for the kid the same to turn the page? Or can they tap, swipe, or does it change or vary? There's examples of ebooks that have the children do different sorts of activities in them, like that are the games embedded of them are operated by tilt versus by touch. And so that can sometimes be confusing to young children. And what happens when we see them confused is that they sort of jump in and out of the activity. So I think that that's what I would recommend. And I think that's it for what I had planned on this slide.
Great, thank you so much, Katie.
Next, we're going to move to using community resources.
All right, so I'm in next. So thinking about community resources, I might max out the community resources in my neighborhood. We go to the library once a week, for sure. And at our library, there are lots of resources. They have audiobooks, but they also have these audiobooks that are MP3 players that you can just plug a headphone in, and you can borrow those books. There are the books on tapes. They have an online access called Hoopla, and I bet there are a lot of libraries that have that. I think that's something, it's a new thing, and I think that the libraries really want all of you to catch on to that because it's such a wonderful access. It's a free access.
You can check out audiobooks.
You can check up to 10 audiobooks. You can do books. There's CDs you can check out, like music. I needed a song for our Christmas program at church, and I found the song on Hoopla. So, yeah, the community, I saw the story hour and crafts. We do, that's why we go every week. I actually go to the baby time one, and even though my kids have outgrown it, it's the one that we love the best. It's the most engaging one, and so they're still welcoming us, so we go. And now that I have a baby, I actually have a reason to go. Yes, Hoopla. And then at our library, there are computers and iPads that children can use. My children don't know that they exist because they don't need to play with those yet. But the few times I've been at the library in the afternoon, I can see all the computers are taken up, because that's probably a resource for the students that don't have access to computers or other technology pieces at home. So it's a great resource for them. Some of the other resources in regards to the zoo and the Children's Museum, I love the dramatic play that they have at those places. So I'll start with the zoo. That's a smaller one. We go to the Hamill Play Zoo at Brookfield Zoo a lot. And they have a couple things. There's one where you can pretend to be a veterinarian, and they have a couple TV screens there, and they have videos on loop of their the vet, Dr. Mike, working on different animals. And then so they'll have x-rays. There's a few microscopes with slides in there for the kids. And then there's lots of hands-on, there's, you know, stethoscopes and medicine dispensers and a lot of things that the kids can get to pretend to be a vet. And then right next door, you can pretend to be a zookeeper. And you can see on this slide here, is that Henry or Leo pretending to work at an office. And I have to say that my daughter, my 4-year-old, loves to pretend to be the zookeeper, because she thinks she's at work like when I go to work or when my husband goes to work. There's a computer screen there and the keyboard and some papers to pass out and a phone that actually, like you can talk to a phone outside. So there's that. And then the children's museums have a lot of technology-based things. You can see the things that are happening in those pictures. Those are from the DuPage Children's Museum.
From Chicago.
Oh, the Chicago Children's Museum too.
DuPage,
yeah. And I know that at DuPage they have this one that is, it's like motion censored. So you can play with shadows and lights. It's a great way to interact with the technology without them really, you know, working with the screen. It's just more the technology. Mm-hmm. And then at our local children's museum at WonderWorks, they have, in the dramatic play area, there's a stage, and there's a whole control board. So there's an actual camera. It's one of those older, bigger cameras. It's pretty bulky. But then another thing my daughter loves is there's all these switches that are like light switches, and each one does a different thing. They either create a sound or they turn on different lights that are on the stage. So those are some of the things that are available there. Looking at some of the other questions I have here, looking for quality, it's really hard. I'm curious, Katie, to hear what you have to say about what is quality. I'm always looking for quality for my kids. I haven't spent money on the app yet. I'm afraid to buy something and it's not good. I really test things out before I really buy them. But like I said before, I use them. I use the iPad only for potty training, and when I look for things that are open-ended, and I look for things that are more than something that just reacts. I want them to rehear a story or something that'll make them think, as opposed to just tapping the screen and something happens. So those are some of the things I look for. Oh, thank you. Managing. Oh, away from home. So another resource, can you go back one? Yeah, another resource from the library. You should check this out at your library. I was just telling Mary about this. I can check out a Wi-Fi hotspot. So I do have a smartphone, but we don't have a very large data package. It's, you know, to limit us. Otherwise, we'd be on our phones all the time. But I'm glad I found this resource of the Wi-Fi hotspot, especially when we have to go to Iowa. It's like a 3-hour drive, and so far I'm lucky enough that my kids don't need a DVD player yet. We just kind of look out the window, but the last 45 minutes are really hard, and that's where the Wi-Fi hotspot comes in. We've been trying to find, you know, a few shows that might like get them to go. Right now it's super Wi, and it's doing the trick. So that's what we do for On the Road. Otherwise, you know, when we're at a restaurant, I don't I usually don't. I don't even take my phone out for myself. I really want them to be interacting with face-to-face since we are out.
I think that brings up a great point of children are watching what the grown-ups around them are doing, and so they're going to notice if you're sort of only halfway engaging with them because you're engaging with your phone, and just to sort of have that as in my mind, that's part of that whole digital citizenship piece as well, that you know, when you're using that and how respectful it is of other people.
So.
Yeah.
Great.
You're welcome.
My kids have been not using a screen in the car, which is really wonderful because they don't need more of that. But we did find that when we're on longer trips in the car, we need something. And so we discovered that there's quite a few podcasts that are available that are geared for children. And we found a really wonderful podcast called The Alien Adventures of Finn Caspian, and you can find it on iTunes. It's free. The host is from Chicago, and his 7-year-old son is his editor. And it's sort of a fantasy science fiction story, but then there's a lot of really interesting learning that's going on about space and different things. There's a robot, which of course, you know, my kids love robots. But my kids really like this particular one because there's built into it different opportunities for them to contribute or interact. So the robot in the storyline eats artwork. And so the host of the podcast invites all of the children who are listening to draw pictures and email them in. So we will create the drawing, use the drawing and create a photo of it so we can email the attachment, which is, again, sort of communicating to the kids about how you go about doing these things, sharing things digitally. But then they were mentioned in the podcast when they received the artwork. And so that was exciting. The other thing that they've been able to do with this particular podcast is create their own sound effect and send it in, and then in subsequent airings of podcast, they can listen for their sound effect that they created. So we had to create an audio file and go through how you go about doing that. You can record it on your phone, and it creates this kind of file that you can email. So we found podcasts to be a really wonderful screen-free option for our 4-year-old and 6-year-old. There's a lot of other ones out there. NPR has several that are for kids, and there's a new resource actually that came up on Town Square today that looks at one of those that's on NPR called But Why, which is more sort of a nonfiction version, but it's children asking real questions they have about the world, and then experts come on and answer the questions. So to me, this is a great opportunity to give children sort of engagement with some technology and digital media without having to be in front of a screen. And then the other thing, which Tan already mentioned with Hoopla, is the idea of audiobooks. And we've really also been getting into listening to audiobooks in the car and at home. And that's also a nice resource that's a screen-free option. And I think when you're thinking about your school-agers that you have coming into your family child care home, they might be interested in some of these options, although my 4-year-old is pretty into it as well. So I think Katie's going to give us some ideas next about some of the best apps she's found for different age groups, how you choose those. So
I am all set. I posted in the Q&A section there, just so you have it in writing, some of the resources that I'm sharing, and I'll post more once I'm done talking here. I didn't want to get too far down the line. So resources that can help you. I know, Tanya, said that you were interested to hear what I said. So some sources that I always use are Children's Technology Review has a YouTube channel that often reviews children's apps. So I'd check them out. They have a website called Little Clickers, which is like tons of information about things that kids are so interested in, like bubble gum. And like robots, and like, so they have a whole web index of resources like to help you with research with young interested children. Another person that I love learning about apps from her name is Carissa Christner, and she's at the Madison Public Library. She's got a regular spot on the Madison News Channel where she does an app review, just like you would do, like listen to a book talk at a library or a bookstore. She does an app talk on their news channel, and so she posts the apps that she reviews on the news channel on her website through the Madison Public Library. Common Sense Media is another one that I go to look for reviews. They have a really wide range of apps in the other media, television programs and things like that. So I always look at age appropriateness on there, but also the School Library Journal, which is affiliated with the American Library Association. They also have a section where they review apps as well. So those are some of like the trusted critics that I always turn to. And the other things that I always think about is the child development. Too, for ebooks, I'm looking for options in the menu. I'm looking if they have a read to me, a read and play, or a read by myself options, because to be honest with you, I often read aloud the ebooks to my children just like I would read them aloud a printed book, and we explore the interactive together. So that option is off the table if the menu options in the ebook are not there. I also look for options for the children to record their own narration of the story. My 2-year-old and my 6-year-old love to record themselves read. And that's actually something that they do in elementary school to practice oral reading fluency once they're beginning readers. So it's a really useful skill to start to develop. A lot of ebooks will track the print. They'll highlight the words as they're read. That's really useful for emergent readers and beginning readers because it draws their visual attention to the print and helps develop their sight word vocabularies. And the other thing to think about is there are standalone ebook apps, and then there are libraries of ebook apps. If you're looking for free, some of the free ones that I can recommend are Storyline Online is run through YouTube. And it's read by, they're just videos of the books that are read by members of the Screen Actors Guild, and they have really high quality literature on there. Beyond that, I really I have a subscription to the Reading Rainbow Skybrary, which if you are about the same age that I am, you're familiar with the Reading Rainbow and their product, and they have a really great selection of books on there, but it requires an internet connection. The other thing that I can suggest is that you find app developers, people who do these things, that you go back once they've published one, you go back for their next app. So some of my favorite app developers in the early childhood range, for older kids, TinyBop is awesome. It's kind of like wordless exploration. They have one for body, I think they have one for space and one for earth. So if you have kids that are interested in nonfiction-y kind of stuff, TinyBop is awesome. Tokaboka has a bunch of play apps that expand on playing farm and playing store. And so those are really great for building children's play narratives and their vocabulary around play. Nosy Crow is probably by far my favorite. They do a bunch of fairy tales. They have a fairy tale puppet theater. And Story Toys is another developer who they work with Eric Carle brand stuff. They have a Very Hungry Caterpillar app where the kids can take care of the caterpillar and feed him, you know, the pears and the plums from the trees, and they put him, they paint with him, and so they really expanding and moving beyond the book, but building from the same core set of ideas. There's another one with Brown Bear where he goes and he collects all the animals and they have a parade, and you can record your own sounds for each animal and build a song. And so those are some of my favorite ones to use with younger children. There's a whole bunch of research in storytelling that kids love to build stories even on digital devices. And there's some apps that are just wonderful for that too that I can totally recommend. One is called Book Creator. And the reason that I like the Book Creator app is because it allows kids to compose both with their finger and with the keyboard option. So it's really developmentally appropriate. And then anything that has a puppet in it. Toontastic is free now. It's put out by Google. It used to be by Launchpad Toys, but kids essentially choose digital puppets and build stories from that. There's also stock puppets, and then there's a felt board app that builds off of common nursery rhymes that are great. A little more complex is an app called Explain Everything. But what all these things have in common is that the children can build their stories either with print or with audio. And I think that that's one thing that technology affords really well, is children can begin to create and share their meaning so easily because they're allowed to use their voice, which is accessible as a tool from the time they learn to talk. And so those are some of my recommendations. But always think about the child, what your context is, and what your purpose is, really.
Great, thanks. There was a question about listing apps, and I said this in the comments, but I just want to say this so everybody hears it. We will make a post on Town Square about some of these apps, so you can look for it there.
Okay, so if you are working with multiple ages of children, which I'm going to guess most of you are, if not all of you, you have to think about what you're going to do to have things set up appropriately for the different ages of kids that you have. So just like you're not going to give a child who's just beginning to learn how to read a chapter book, and you aren't going to give an infant the little Legos. You don't want to give all the kids all the same kinds of ebooks and apps and games. And so in my house with a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, even though they're not that far away in age, they are at different developmental levels, and they do have really widely different interests. And so we have a children's Kindle that we actually have made 2 separate accounts on. And most devices are going to give you an option to have different logins for different users. And so that's what we've done, and they each have their own little icon and their own little password, and they can get in and access all of the apps and books on the Kindle that are meant for them. You can also try to think about how you're going to manage those things in terms of can you set up a built-in chime or timer? Can you have a sign-up right on the device that if you have a lot of kids that want to use it, they can kind of have some more, take some more initiative, have some more autonomy in managing that, but having it set up for that. So I think that helps to give some ideas about how to keep materials set up for children that are most appropriate for them in particular. Another thing you can do, even on a smartphone, but on a computer, is think about separate folders. Even just setting up separate folders with children's names that have things in them. You can also that way keep things they've created as well. So Ton and I were talking earlier about kids wanting to use photos to create a PowerPoint slideshow. And that's another thing you can audio record. And so then kids can keep their digital media files, photos they've taken, photos of themselves, PowerPoints they've created, anything like that. Their sound effect that they send into the podcast, they can keep that MP4 in their own folder. Okay. I think Ton has got another example to share about a way she has used technology now.
Yes. So in our house, so we are Apple household, so we have an iPad, iPhones, and we love to FaceTime. So the picture here is actually of the boy that I watch FaceTiming his mom. And it was, you know, I knew she had an iPhone. When I took him on, she was just getting back to work. So, you know, after spending 18 months with him at home. So, of course, she missed him. So this was such a great opportunity for her. I think going back to work was hard for her. So she looked forward to, you know, the 2 minutes she got to see him on the phone while we were sitting and eating lunch. It was the most convenient time. I didn't have to manage anybody. We were all in our seats. And so the picture is, as you see, is him talking to her. And, I mean, they both look forward to it. At one point, towards the end of me watching him, his grandma wasn't watching him as much. And so we even started FaceTiming grandma just, you know, because she was missing him too. So yeah, so I use it with the kids I watch, but it started with my kids. Every morning we would FaceTime my dad, and my dad looks forward to it. It doesn't take many rings before he'll pick up the FaceTime call. And then we would call Daddy too, because of course we miss Daddy too. So that's what we use. You know, that's one of the ways we use. And then on the next slide we talk about other tools that our phones and our devices can be used for. And
I'm just gonna, Ton, I just want to let everybody know, because this is just a still shot, but actually if you look on the Townsquare website and look up FaceTime at lunchtime, there's actually a video of this on the website, so you can see it as a video as well.
Yeah, thank you. I use my phone as, when we are not home, we use our phone as the timer all the time. When we are ready to go, you know, I give them a 5-minute warning, and I'll set the clock for 5 minutes. And they know. My husband was able to get Mr. Rogers' song, the Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. So whenever they hear that, they know it's time to go. My two kids, sometimes that song will come on, and they'll look at me like, uh-oh, what are we supposed to do? You know, they know that something is supposed to happen. But my timer is actually the universal timer. So if I'm at story time, most of the friends want to leave around the same time. So the moms will take advantage of me, and if they'll tell them, like, you know, when Molly and Sam have to go, you guys have to go too, and they'll listen to my timer. So it's been beneficial for the other parents too. They try to use it in their homes, and sometimes it doesn't always work. It works best from Ton's phone, apparently.
I've even been with Tana at another time where, you know, you say to children when they're trying to negotiate sharing, how many more minutes are you going to use the toy before you're ready to share it, and give them some autonomy in deciding how many more minutes. But you can then offer, as Tan always says, do you want me to put the 2 minutes on the phone so that it's very clear for the other child, which I think helps validate, like, okay, it really isn't going to go on forever before my turn comes. And it's a audio and visual cue. It's also just a really practical way that we, as grown-ups, we'll set timers or alarms on our phone for things. So it's really relevant in that way. It reflects what they're seeing grown-ups doing. Okay, and then I think you are up. There's one more. So I know Tan does this a lot. Do you want to speak to this at all? Or you want me to go ahead?
You go ahead.
Okay. One of the main ways, and I know somebody posted earlier in the Q&A about using your iPhone to take photos for documentation to share with parents. I think that's one of the most interesting changes in recent years that children are experiencing is that there's so many images that you can go back to and look at that makes it a different time in history now than we've experienced before. But these two examples on the left, you know, that moment where my older son caught this katydid, and he was like, oh, look at this, you have to take a picture because I want to see it up close, because he knows you can zoom in on the phone, see it up close. He also asked me to take a short video, and so I also have a video where we can see the way the insect is moving around his hand. And then the other example is actually one of our videos that we have on Town Square provider who was just having a conversation, and you can find this in the quick clip on the site, but she's having a conversation with the kids about a field trip they had gone on in the past, and she said, now I know we can go back and look at some of those pictures, and she's showing the kids how to swipe through the phone and scroll through the different photos, and they're kind of looking at all these images and revisiting that experience, but it gives them a very concrete, tangible, visual reminder of what they had done. I don't know if you've got...
Oh,
anything else? I know you do a lot.
I take pictures, and that's another way to communicate with the parents too. That being away from their child, they just want to see pictures of them all day. So I do my best. Until recently, I didn't have a phone with very much memory, so I wasn't always the best at it, but I'm getting better at it. And in the beginning of when I was talking about potty training with my daughter, that was what she loved looking at, was old videos of herself. So it was that was what got her through it.
Yeah, I love when my kids say, "Well, who's that baby?" And I'm like, "That baby." When we scroll through the old photos, we actually have gone to cloud-based storage for the photos and videos so that we can continue to make room on our phones. But it seems very meaningful to the children. This image, or these several images on this slide, originally we were hoping to embed some video, but we didn't want to mess up anybody's connection to the webinar. So I took some stills, but we spent quite a bit of time raking this giant pile of leaves this fall, and the boys decided, of course, they were going to run and jump into the pile of leaves, and they said to me, well, you're going to need to take a video of us doing this. And so they asked me to get my phone out to take a video of them. They ran from the end of the block down to the pile, jumped in the pile of leaves, and then they got out of the pile of leaves and they said, okay, let's look at the video. So instantly, of course, they're able to, and they look at the video and they're kind of negotiating that, okay, so this time we should do it this way, and actually sort of revisiting the experience or remaking the experience because they were able to review what they had just done and make a different plan. And so I think that this is a really interesting idea that you can reenact a moment or create a variation of a moment in the moment. And this type of documentation and revisiting, I think, is going to have some sort of influence on the way in which, or already does, have an influence on the way in which children see themselves, the way they understand themselves, their sense of identity, because they have these digital archives of their lives. They're experiencing themselves in very different ways from the ways children in the past have had an experience of themselves. So I'm not exactly sure what it means, but I do think that children tend to notice more details. They tend to be more observant of photos and videos, and a visual experience is a different thing for children now than before, and this is bound to have some influence on their development, but it also is part of the world that they're living in. The other thing that I'll say that I think is wonderful about having the technology in your hand is that right away, so I know I do this with the boys all the time, we'll be doing this really interesting, exciting thing. I'll take a picture, I'll take a short video, and immediately in the span of like 15 seconds, I can quickly send it. I can send it to grandma, I can send it to dad. It's so wonderful how quickly you can share those moments with people who then can have something to go back to when they see those children and say, oh, so you jumped on a pile of leaves today. That looked like it was so much fun. Tell me about that, which then, prompts that relationship and the connection and the conversation. I can't say enough. We do this all the time. Look at photos right away, look at videos right away, and have this kind of revisiting or recasting of the experience.
I think that we can't really say enough about just the learning potential in revisiting video with young children, and particularly around the idea of social emotional development, especially with young children, because when they're able to rewatch a situation and really think through what's happened in that situation, they're able to kind of come to terms with what's happened there. Whereas when something happens very quickly and in the moment, they can't really focus on what's happening there. So the idea of revisiting video, I would suggest just try it with children and see what you get from it. Ask them what's happening in a video. And it's pretty amazing to see them kind of engage with that process of a different way of knowing something or a different way of seeing something.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I just want to throw in there, as you were talking, Angela, it made me think about, we don't necessarily always think about technology as a way for working with children in their social and emotional development. But I think, this example, and then also just the way in which children are able to observe other children or think about how something looks and then have a conversation. Well, how do you think someone feels when they're doing that? What kind of feelings are they having? Any of those kinds of extensions of the technology into social and emotional development, I think, are really great opportunities that we have with technology now.
Yeah, I agree, Mary. I think that the idea that it's probably one of the least things anybody would ever say when we say, what are they getting out of technology? Rarely would somebody say, oh, it's social emotional development. But really, when you think about using technology appropriately, you use it with other people, you share that technology, the examples of revisiting. So I think there's actually lots of opportunities, and really great opportunities, to kind of expand upon social emotional development in that way. So I'm going to kind of bring it all back around, and we should have some time at the end if you have some final questions you'd like to ask anybody. So technology, this is just really meant to be a really, really introduction idea of using technology. Some of you may already use it really well, and so this is just kind of a reminder of some of those things. Some of you may just be starting to think about using it. So we hope you kind of just look through this and get some ideas from it. And there's actually a module on Town Square around an introduction to a module introduction to using a constructivist approach to working with technology with young children. So it gets a little bit more into specifics of how to really kind of begin with a really child-centered approach to technology. And you can find that module actually on Town Square as well. But we know there's lots of challenges around using technology. Number one really is knowledge, and we saw that in really the resources and the guidance and the policies that we were looking at. They really said you need to be knowledgeable, and that's one of the things that I would say is really important. You really have to find out what's appropriate practice, and Dr. Postigo was talking about appropriate and high-quality apps, and those are things you really need to read up on. What does make that? Like what Dr. Postigo was talking about, the hotspots. What does that mean? Because sometimes we might think, oh, the more it does, the better it is. Well, not really when we really want high quality. So those are things we need to really kind of brush up on and really improve our knowledge about to be really appropriate mentors for technology use. Access. We really also need to think about what is the access. This was one of the things that was also talked about in policies around, who has access. And Tan talked a little bit about that in terms of maybe if you don't have access to these different types of technology, then you can get it elsewhere. You can go to libraries and other places where you can find access. But it is really an issue still, the digital divide, in terms of what children have access to different kinds of technology. And so it's kind of our responsibility, too, to make sure that we are allowing children to have access to those things. Time as well. Time is one of those things where we need to think about our day. The day is really busy, and you don't want the first thing on your list to be, what is the time I have today to spend on technology? You want to think about your whole day and really think intentionally about where technology fits within your day. Some days it might not fit at all. Other days it might be really something that you can go to make things really meaningful in your programs. So it's really think about these challenges and how they're going to work into your programs. So I want to go back again, always return to, those resources. They're such great resources. The NAEYC policy statement, the AAP statement that's in the beginning of this, really great policies and really great guidance to look at. But you also have to look at those as to how they will work in your own program as well. So keep that in mind. You can also go to Townsquare. Again, we have modules there. We have short, quick videos and ideas and lists. We're going to put up some lists for high-quality apps and some ideas and some checklists about that, so you can keep checking back for that. The Tech Center here at Erickson Institute is a really well-known, TEC stands for Technology and Early Childhood Center. Very well-known center for early childhood, lots of professional development that you can find at the Tech Center to support your knowledge around that. Dr. Pastia commented on Common Sense Media. If you're not familiar with Common Sense Media, it really is a great resource to kind of find out what could be high quality and how to figure out what high quality is. So go to these resources for information, articles, books, reviews, on technology and media. They are really great places for you to start that learning process. These are the links to all of those that I just mentioned. Also the Fred Rogers Center, and the NAEYC policy statement was a joint statement between NAEYC and the Fred Rogers Center. So they're also a great resource to kind of help yourself be more knowledgeable in that way. And I want to leave you with this idea because some of you were making this statement too. And I understand this statement when you're saying, I don't really use technology. They use technology when they're with their parents, so I don't use it at all here. And I completely understand that statement and respect that for anybody who really doesn't want to have any sort of technology in their program. That is completely up to every person, every provider. But what I want to say to you is that you are very influential. You're very influential to children in your care, and you're very influential to parents. And again, burying our heads in the sand doesn't help. Technology is not going away. And really, it would be great if we became, if you as providers became kind of these mentors for parents, helping them figure out what is positive ways to use technology. We know they may be using it very inappropriately in very negative ways. So how can we help them kind of figure out what are the positive ways and what can be a positive impact for using technology? So those are one of the things I'd really like to say to you. So if you can just pick one or two things to even maybe try out and tell your parents about using those. And so you can really talk about how appropriately to use technology. And as you become more knowledgeable, you can actually even talk about inappropriate ways that technology shouldn't be used as well. So we're going to have some time for questions here, but I would also say if you don't get your questions answered here, if we don't get to your questions here, and you have more questions, you can reach us at info@townsquareil.org, or if you have stories you want to share with us about how you use technology. We would love to hear your stories, and we would love to hear your stories with pictures, because Townsquare is our most favorite thing to post on the website out of anything is your stories. So we want to hear your stories, and we want to publish you on the website. So if you have something you want to share with us or a question that you want to get answered still, please email us, and we will get back to you on that. So for now, are there any questions that anybody has from our presenters? Lots of comments. Going through anything to see if there's any questions, any remaining questions. Not really. Some of those are informative. That's great.
Hey, Angela, I just wanted to, I saw somebody posted giving a DVD to a child when they were leaving, and I can remember when I was a teacher, and I would create a slideshow for that parent event at the end of the year, and how I had to use an actual slide projector. And how complicated it was to get the negatives from the print photos, and this tells you how old I am, and have slides, and I think how much more simple technology makes those kinds of things, that you can really quickly pull together a set of videos or photos or create a slideshow. I know the screensavers that we have are accessed, or have access to our cloud drive of photos, and so photos of the kids are sort of scrolling on the screensaver, and they see photos of themselves when they were babies up through now, and all you got to do is like click the setting. I mean, it's so much simpler now, and to the point that even kids can be working on those types of projects where they're pulling that kind of media together. So I just wanted to talk about low tech and high tech.
So there was a question, and I'll throw this to Dr. Postiga. So someone was asking if a parent had asked her if she thought that books would go away as we know it.
Absolutely not. 100% no. I think that as a society, we have such a strong affinity for a printed medium that I don't think that the ebooks are going to take over. Where I think they're useful is in developing the habits of mind that are required to read on screen. I don't know about you guys, but every time I go to read a book on my Kindle, it's an entirely different experience than when I'm reading my mystery novels in paperback. Because I'm distracted by the other things that are happening online in the digital world. I want to check my email. I want to figure out what the weather is. I have all these questions that pop up into my mind, and I can immediately answer those if I move away from the mystery novel that I'm reading and go into another app on my phone. And so I think that in terms of experiential existence, I think that we're always going to have paper. But I think that some screen time should be reading time. And that I honestly believe holds true from an early age on, because we're really, I mean, if you think about the ways of thinking and the ways of doing that we're starting to develop with children from very young, what's going to happen when they move into a 3rd, 4th grade classroom when all of their textbooks are digital? Because it's less expensive for the schools to pay for those. So I think that developing some strategies for reading on a device and having those sort of co-viewing activities, much in the same way you would with a printed book, with a digital book with a parent and lap reading, are really important.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that you pointed this out earlier too, but I think that the idea that it's not just handing over a digital book to children either. It's the same as sitting with them reading a book that they can have in their hands or an ebook. It's still reading together and making sure that we're doing both of those, I think. I mean, I still love the feel of books and having them in my hands as well.
Yeah, some of the more fun conversations that I've had with my children when it comes to ebooks is I love the question, why do you think that the author or illustrator or app designer chose to put that animation there? Why is it important? And so we're building sort of some of those critical literacy skills that get at like positioning, and this is with my kindergarten and first grader, but sometimes they're like, Mom, that's totally not necessary. I don't know why that's there. It doesn't mean anything. And they sort of like smile from ear to ear when my kindergartner, first grader says that.
I think that is, I'm so glad you said that, because I think that right there, when we talk about the idea of access and all children having access, and the idea that it's about critical literacy, it's the children, your children, really thinking about the process and why we do something. If some children don't have access to this kind of reading, these kinds of materials, they don't have the even ability to ask those kinds of questions and to become critical thinkers about that kind of literacy. So that idea that it's important to expose all of the children to those kinds of technologies is really important, I think. So I'm glad you said that. Thanks.
Welcome.
We don't have any more questions. I want to remind everybody that this is being recorded, and it will be on the Town Square website under the Grow tab. So you can go back in and go through the webinar again piece by piece, find any of the resources that we have in here. If you have other questions, you can certainly email us, as I've put in here. We have, of course, in the technology webinar, there's going to be a technology glitch, right? Because that's how the world works. So we actually, normally what would happen after a webinar is you'd click into it and it would automatically generate your certificate for this. There was a glitch in this particular webinar, so what's going to happen is that Monday we will send out the certificate to everybody who was on the webinar tonight. So you will receive a certificate for it, but you will receive it Monday once we email it out. If you are looking to get this into gateways, probably your easiest thing to do, because you can do it manually, but probably the easiest thing for you to do will be to go back into Town Square and just click through the webinar again once it's posted next week, and then it will automatically post to gateways for you. So I apologize for the glitch there, but it wasn't worth putting off the webinar for to fix. So we'll get you out the certificates, and if there's no more questions, we'll end a few minutes early tonight. Great. Well, thank you all for joining us, and go online on Town Square and check out the resources there. And we'll see you next time.